What if the most decisive battles are fought far from the front lines, hidden deep within a city's shadows, far from the roar of artillery and the churned earth of trenches? Consider, for example, the events that unfolded just last night. In the city of Zaporizhzhia, a single thunderous strike shattered the calm that had settled over its neighborhoods. The target, the Ural Barracks Complex, a sprawling, heavily fortified military hub that had become the engine and heart of the Ukrainian Southern Front's operations. The force of the strike was so immense that fireballs leapt into the night sky, painting the horizon with an eerie orange glow. Shockwaves from the blast rattled windows in neighborhoods miles away, and residents across the city awoke to the distant, trembling echo of destruction. Why does this attack matter so deeply? To answer that, we must understand that today's wars are not won solely by tanks grinding forward or foot soldiers storming trenches. The true battles, the ones that shape the fate of nations, are often decided far from the public eye. The Ural Barracks was not just a collection of buildings. It was a living, breathing organism, pumping life into Ukraine's defenses in the south. By striking it in the dead of night, the attackers did more than cause a spectacle. They may have shifted the delicate balance of power across the entire region. History offers us many examples of decisive moments that played out away from the main theaters of combat. During the Second World War, for instance, the Allied bombing campaign against German industrial centers, places like the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt, crippled the enemy's ability to wage war, even as soldiers fought far away on distant battlefields. In the Vietnam War, the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail became the lifeblood of North Vietnamese operations, and efforts to disrupt it had strategic consequences that reverberated across the entire conflict. The lesson is clear. The fate of armies is often sealed not at the front, but in the silent shadows where supplies, morale, and organization are forged or shattered. If you believe wars are won only by direct confrontation, look closer. The true stakes are often concealed in these secret blows, moments that can sap an army's strength and spirit before the next dawn. To overlook these is to misunderstand how modern conflicts are truly waged, and how they are ultimately lost or won. So how did this meticulously planned strike unfold? And what does it mean for both sides as the war grinds on? To answer these questions, we must peel back the layers of secrecy and examine the anatomy of the attack. In doing so, we'll reveal the new face of warfare that is emerging before our very eyes. The Ural Barracks was far more than a simple place to sleep. It functioned as the living core of Ukraine's southern war effort, an intricate, interlocking web of logistics, support, and command. Imagine, if you will, a vast military city within a city, with interconnected buildings, warehouses, repair shops, and barracks that buzzed with activity around the clock. This was the Ural Barracks Complex in Zaporizhzhia, a true labyrinthine military nerve center. Its corridors echoed with the constant footsteps of soldiers, officers, medics, and logistics personnel, all working in seamless coordination to keep Ukraine's southern front supplied and resilient. Every day followed a relentless rhythm. Battle-weary units rotated in from the front lines, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. They rested, received medical attention, and regrouped before returning to the fight. Meanwhile, fresh replacements arrived in carefully managed waves, ensuring that the front lines were never left vulnerable. The staff orchestrated these movements with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony, balancing exhaustion, necessity, and the ever-present threat of another attack. Inside the complex, warehouses brimmed with everything needed to sustain a modern army: ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies, and food. Massive trucks rumbled in and out at all hours, some destined for forward positions, others returning for repair or resupply. Armored vehicles were serviced and readied. Drones, both for reconnaissance and attack, were stored, maintained, and readied for deployment. The Ural Barracks was not just a depot, it was a crucial staging ground, the final bastion of safety before soldiers plunged back into the chaos of war. But the true importance of the Ural Barracks extended beyond mere logistics. It served as a psychological anchor, a rare oasis of order and predictability for troops living with the constant specter of danger. For many, This complex represented the closest thing to safety, a place to catch their breath, reconnect with comrades, and prepare mentally for the trials ahead. To disrupt this anchor is to threaten the army's very capacity to wage war, both physically and spiritually. Overlooking these invisible support structures is to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of contemporary conflict. While headlines may focus on dramatic explosions, territorial advances, or heroic last stands, it is the hidden machinery of war, the deep logistical veins, that determine which side can endure the long grind, and which will ultimately falter. But what happens when this vital nerve center is suddenly wiped from existence in a single, catastrophic moment? In one precisely calculated strike, the Ural Barracks Complex was obliterated. The impact of this event rippled far beyond the physical blast zone, instantly reshaping the entire southern theater of war. A single well-placed explosion can unravel months, even years, of careful planning and hard-won progress. The strike on the Ural Barracks did precisely that, obliterating not just a set of buildings, but the very nerve center of Ukrainian operations in the southern region. In one terrible moment, highly trained personnel, vital vehicles, and vast reserves of ammunition simply vanished, replaced by a hellscape of fire, smoke, and ruin. Yet the true damage ran far deeper. The lifelines that once fed the front, routes for supplies, reinforcements, and rotation, were abruptly severed. Where there had once been order and routine, chaos surged. Commanders lost their trusted hub, forcing every fresh supply run and troop movement into a landscape of confusion, uncertainty, and heightened risk. The psychological shockwaves radiated outward as swiftly as the physical ones. For months, places like Zaporizhzhia had served as rare sanctuaries, offering soldiers a desperately needed chance to rest, heal, and regain their resolve. Now, even these supposedly safe rear zones feel exposed. The comforting belief that there is safety behind the lines has been shattered, replaced by a gnawing, paralyzing fear. Nowhere is truly secure. When a haven becomes a hazard, anxiety spreads like wildfire through every rank. This was no act of blind luck, nor the result of a stray missile. Russian intelligence spent months surveilling the complex, gathering information from satellites, drones, and informants on the ground. They waited patiently for the precise moment when a single blow would inflict the maximum possible damage. When the strike finally came, the barracks were full, the depots stocked to their limit, and the staff at their busiest. The attack was surgical, a calculated assault on the heart of Ukrainian logistics in the south, executed with chilling precision. The aftermath was captured by night vision footage and the stunned accounts of survivors. A white-hot flash marked the initial impact, followed by a rolling wave of secondary detonations as ammunition caches and fuel stores erupted one after another. Towers of flame and thick, acrid smoke rose over the city, each new explosion a fresh wound. The faces of the survivors bore a grim truth. They had never expected devastation on this scale, and certainly not so deep behind the front lines. With rear areas now in doubt, every Ukrainian movement slows, and every decision becomes fraught with risk. Uncertainty seeps into the daily routine, turning even the simplest action, moving a supply truck, rotating a platoon, into a gamble with potentially catastrophic consequences. Commanders and soldiers alike are forced to ask, with each step, is anywhere safe anymore? But the consequences of this strike do not end here. Instead, they signal a new and dangerous phase in the conflict, one in which rear area attacks may determine the fate of entire campaigns. Modern warfare has evolved far beyond the muddy trenches and static front lines of the past. Today, battles are waged on power grids, railway lines, and inside command centers that once felt untouchable. In the Second World War, the bombing of supply lines in Normandy before D-Day was critical to the Allied advance. In more recent history, the Gulf War saw airstrikes on Iraqi communications and logistics hubs, severing the enemy's ability to coordinate and resupply. The strike on the Ural Barracks Complex in Zaporizhzhia was only the most visible element of a carefully orchestrated offensive. While the world's attention was fixed on the flames-consuming Zaporizhzhia, waves of precision-guided missiles and swarms of drones swept across Ukraine. Energy stations, remote railway junctions, air defense batteries, and secret command bunkers were all struck, in a relentless campaign designed to cripple the backbone of Ukraine's resistance. None of these targets were chosen at random. Each was handpicked to sever the arteries that moved troops, ammunition, and information. Night after night, these strikes have pushed the front lines deeper into what was once considered safe territory, forcing Ukrainian commanders to guard every corner and stretching their defenses ever thinner. By launching waves of drones, the attackers overwhelmed Ukrainian air defenses, probing for weaknesses and exploiting gaps. A train yard is destroyed here, a fuel depot burns there, a segment of the power grid plunges into darkness without warning. Every successful hit makes it harder for defenders to regroup, resupply, or even call for help. The pressure is relentless, not just on the battlefield, but in the very nerve centers that coordinate the military's response. The toll is as much psychological as it is physical. Soldiers and officers now understand that nowhere is truly safe, not even locations dozens of miles from the front. Commanders scatter their forces, camouflage equipment, and invent new supply routes on the fly, just as Soviet partisans did during the German invasion of the Soviet Union, adapting constantly to survive. But this constant vigilance drains energy, slows every decision, and slowly erodes morale. In this new kind of war, the fate of entire campaigns may turn on the ability to move, supply, and adapt. When critical lifelines are severed, collapse can come suddenly and unexpectedly, as history has shown time and again. With the rules of war rewritten, both commanders and soldiers face an agonizing question. How do you defend a front that is everywhere, when the next strike could come from anywhere? But the consequences extend far beyond the military. As the battlefield expands to encompass entire cities, ordinary civilians are swept into the conflict. The line between military target and civilian life begins to blur. In recent years, conflicts in Syria and Iraq have shown how strikes on infrastructure, power stations, water supplies, hospitals, can devastate civilian populations and sow chaos far from the front lines. Nowhere is truly safe. The strike on the Ural Barracks Complex in Zaporizhzhia has shattered illusions of security, forcing both armies and civilian populations to confront a new kind of war, one in which the front can appear anywhere, at any time. The destruction of what was once a central Ukrainian stronghold is a brutal warning to all. Massive bases, once considered pillars of strength, are now glaring targets. Their fall demonstrates that size and fortification offer no guaranteed protection. In the aftermath, the instinct is to scatter forces into smaller, less conspicuous locations, in effect, to decentralize and hide. But such dispersion brings its own dangers. Isolated units become far more difficult to resupply, reinforce, or command. Every step, every routine, is now a calculated risk. Soldiers can no longer rely on established supply routes or fortified rear areas. Moving ammunition, food, or fresh troops means exposing them to unseen threats, with every convoy and staging post a potential bullseye. Commanders must stretch their authority across unpredictable ground, while the rank and file live with the constant realization that safety is nothing more than an illusion. The psychological wounds may prove the deepest and most lasting. When the rear becomes as lethal as the front, faith in leadership can falter. The obliteration of supposedly safe zones erodes the trust and discipline that bind armies together. Survivors carry the trauma, haunted by the sense that order itself has collapsed into chaos. Modern leaders face a punishing dilemma. Should they concentrate forces for efficiency, risking catastrophic loss if struck, or scatter them for survival, risking paralysis and loss of cohesion? History offers no simple answers. During the First World War, armies struggled with the same problem: whether to mass troops for strength or disperse to avoid destruction from increasingly powerful artillery. The dilemma remains, now complicated by precision weapons and rapid communication. The war zone has expanded. The front has dissolved into a network of hazards, where danger can erupt without warning from every direction. With both sides stymied by this new reality, the contest shifts to the shadows. Victory now belongs to those who can outthink their opponent, who master logistics, deception, and anticipation, rather than relying solely on brute force. These are not lessons for generals alone. The next great conflicts, whether waged with drones, cyber attacks, or disinformation, will hinge on the unseen. Morale, supply, and trust will matter as much as hardware and firepower. In this world, the outcome is shaped not only by who has the bigger guns, but by who adapts fastest to the war in the shadows. But how did such a devastating strike on a rear-area fortress become possible? To answer that, we must examine the step-by-step anatomy of the Ural Barracks attack and see how modern intelligence and technology are reshaping the art of war. Behind every headline about the front lines, another war is raging in the shadows, a struggle for supply, for movement, for the very power to fight. This is the war of logistics, surveillance, and strategic patience. The events in Zaporizhzhia were not simply the result of chaos or chance. The Ural Barracks Complex, once the beating heart of Ukrainian military operations in the south, now lies in ruins because of a deliberate, methodical campaign. With its destruction, an entire network of supply, rotation, and command has collapsed, an outcome planned and prepared for over many weeks, perhaps months. The process began with intelligence gathering. Drones, satellites, and informants tracked the comings and goings at the Ural Barracks, building up a detailed picture of its routines. Similar to how the Allies in the Second World War used aerial reconnaissance and resistance fighters to map out the German V-weapon sites, Russian intelligence methodically pieced together a plan. They watched for patterns. When were the depots most stocked? When did the largest numbers of troops gather? When was the staff most occupied, and thus least prepared for sudden disaster? When the moment was right, the strike was executed with precision. A salvo of missiles, guided by up-to-date coordinates, targeted both the buildings housing personnel and the infrastructure supporting logistics. The result was a devastating chain reaction. An initial blinding flash, followed by a series of powerful secondary explosions as ammunition stores and fuel depots went up in flames. Night vision cameras captured the inferno, and news of the destruction spread rapidly through military channels. The aftermath was immediate and severe. Supply routes had to be rerouted or abandoned. Units expecting to rotate out for rest found themselves stranded, their relief delayed or canceled. Repair shops and drone operations were lost, reducing the Army's ability to repair vehicles or gather intelligence. For those at the front, the impact was felt quickly. Ammunition shortages, delayed reinforcements, and a growing sense that support was no longer reliable. The psychological toll grew with each passing day. Soldiers who had counted on the Ural Barracks as a sanctuary now faced the grim reality that nowhere was safe. Commanders scrambled to establish new bases, but these too became targets for surveillance and attack. The cycle of fear and uncertainty deepened, spreading from the rank and file to the highest levels of command. Practical steps were taken in response. Ukrainian forces began to decentralize their supply depots, moving ammunition and fuel to smaller scattered locations. Troop movements were staggered and disguised, with convoys traveling under cover of darkness and using deception tactics reminiscent of those employed by the North African campaign's Ghost Army in the Second World War. Civilians, too, adapted. Many began volunteering to help camouflage military assets or provide early warning of drone attacks, echoing the home front efforts seen in Britain during the Blitz. But these measures come at a cost. Decentralization means slower response times, increased risk of isolation, and a greater burden on already strained logistics. The attackers, meanwhile, continue to adapt, using new technologies to find and strike even the smallest targets. The advantage now lies with those who can innovate faster, who can anticipate the enemy's moves and stay one step ahead in the deadly game of cat and mouse. As the dust settles over Zaporizhzhia, a grim realization becomes clear. Modern conflicts no longer hinge solely on who holds a trench or advances a single kilometer. The decisive clashes are increasingly invisible, fought over warehouses, depots, repair shops, and the critical hubs that sustain hope and order. These silent strikes sever the lifelines of any force, the ability to resupply, regroup, and press forward. Leave the rear exposed, and even the finest soldiers at the front become vulnerable, isolated, and at risk of collapse. The danger is unmistakable. If we focus only on the visible battles, the ruined buildings, the shifting front lines, we risk missing the silent influences that shape the outcome. This story is about more than military tactics. It is about the lives of soldiers left without safe havens, and the civilians whose cities transform overnight into targets. It marks a profound shift in the nature of war, one where psychological shock and logistical breakdown can outweigh even the fiercest head-on assaults. To truly grasp war as it unfolds, we must look beyond the headlines, question what is left unsaid, and recognize the unseen forces at work. The attack on the Ural Barracks is a lesson in how history pivots, not always through dramatic charges, but often through the quiet unraveling of support far from the cameras. The challenge for leaders, soldiers, and citizens alike is not just to survive these new realities, but to adapt to them. This means investing in intelligence, dispersing assets, protecting supply lines, and, perhaps most importantly, maintaining morale and trust in the face of uncertainty. It is a lesson as old as war itself, yet more urgent now than ever. Ignore these hidden mechanisms, and you risk misunderstanding history as it happens. Only by looking beyond the obvious can we hope to see the whole story as it emerges, one shaped as much by what is destroyed in the shadows as by what is fought over in the light.